afternoon, everyone. I'm Linda Dixon from the Lexington Veterans Association, and I'm happy to welcome you to a presentation on prosthetics, how bionic technology is helping to restore function to amputees once considered impossible. We extend a warm welcome to our fellow veterans at the Edith Norse Rogers Memorial Veterans Hospital in Bedford, Massachusetts. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Arthur Graham. A native of Scotland, Arthur studied and worked in England before moving to the US. And in 2003, he teamed up with Matt Albuquerque, the founder of Next Step Bionics and Prosthetics, based in Manchester, New Hampshire. And he took on the job of expanding the practice to Newton, Massachusetts, where he has served as clinical manager ever since. An adjunct faculty member at Northeastern University since 2002, Arthur teaches prosthetics and orthotics to fifth-year physical therapy students. He's the former president of the Massachusetts Society of Orthotics and Prosthetics. Next Step has since expanded to 2 more locations in New Hampshire, Warwick, Rhode Island, and soon Worcester, Mass. In 2019, Next Step was acquired by Osser, the second largest prosthetics company in the world. And I have to just say, in addition to this incredible lineup of talents and just achievements, Arthur also does a killer impersonation of Sean Connery. I had to say that. All right, please welcome Arthur Graham.
Thanks very much, Linda. I feel like we've been talking about this presentation for about 2 years. So it's nice to finally get a chance to meet everyone virtually and talk about something that I've spent the best part of my life being involved with, which is prosthetics. I'm going to share my screen here and the wonders of technology. I'm going to bring this up. Hopefully that is all right. Maybe Linda, you could just unmute for a second and just say that's fine, ready to go.
Looks good to me, Arthur.
Okay, great. Thanks very much.
Yep.
I just don't want to be talking for half an hour and realize nobody could hear me.
That would be awful.
Okay, so let's start. So as Linda said, the topic of today's presentation is prosthetics, and we're going to talk about past, present, and future. As she said, I work for Next Step Bionics and Prosthetics in Newton, although I am a native of Scotland. We've been here about 25 years, so I think we're staying. Again, as Linda said, we are expanding in New England. We currently have 5 locations. Obviously, this is our nice little business park in Newton. We have an office in Rhode Island, Manchester, New Hampshire, Lebanon, New Hampshire, and Concord, New Hampshire. And by the end of the summer, early fall, we're hoping to add Worcester to the list of that. And as Linda also said, we were acquired by Osser, which is the second biggest company in the world. Their world headquarters are actually in Iceland, of all places, one of the smallest countries in the world, but they are a country of innovators and very, very smart people. And we're going to talk about some of that technology as we go through this. So if we talk a little bit about the history of prosthetics, there is evidence of amputations being done 43,000 years ago. I'm sure even further back in time than that. And I love the description of amputations with primitive tools. I don't think I would want to be a patient undergoing amputation around that time. As we go through and fast forward a little bit to 300 BC, there was some evidence of a prosthesis unearthed in the ruins of Pompeii, which was very well preserved. So we know that the humble prosthetist has been around plying his trade for many, many years. Things started to get interesting in the Middle Ages with the use and invention of gunpowder, especially in munitions and explosives, because now we had come up with the ability to blow each other apart and inflict some terrible injuries, which result obviously in a much greater incidence of amputation. And again, moving through here, through the timeline, the problem with amputation back in those days was that your chances of survival were somewhat limited, which was due to the lack of really any antiseptic technique. And it wasn't until 1865 when Lord Lister started his surgical antiseptic technique that you actually started to see people surviving in much larger numbers. And then one other little point there, 1812, in the Battle of Beresina, there was a surgeon, Dominique Jean Larrey, who, according to the history books, removed 200 limbs in a 24-hour period, which is quite an amazing feat when you think about it. We're not sure what the survival rate was, but it certainly was quite an amazing surgical feat. So we truck along a little bit further in history to the American Civil War. And again, as I said earlier, gunpowder and munitions had started to become developed and become more adept at killing each other and injuring each other. There was obviously a huge rise in the number of amputations. And actually, as the Civil War dragged on, the number of amputations rose astronomically, really. And this forced really a more of an organization in the field of prosthetics. And you'll see I have some sayings as I go through my presentation about game changers. One of them was that most of the great inventions in prosthetics come from amputees. And here was the first one, James Hanger, who was a Civil War veteran himself, and he developed what he later patented as the hanger limb from whittled barrel staves. So people such as Hanger helped transform and really advance the prosthetics field. But as you can see with some of these samples here, that they were pretty primitive. Limbs were often hollowed out from solid blocks of wood or were fashioned from metal. So you can imagine that comfort was probably not of the highest order in those days. We move along to World War I. And unlike the Civil War, there wasn't so much advancement in the field. And despite the lack of technological advances, the Surgeon General of the Army at the time realized the importance of the discussion of technology and the development of prosthesis. And this eventually led to the formation of the American Orthotic and Prosthetic Association, AOPA, which is our kind of largest body in the industry today. And again, if you look at some of the pictures here, you can see that the materials being used were really all that was available at the time. Leather, wood, and metal were very prevalent. And you often find that the humble prosthetist here perhaps started his life as maybe a shoemaker or a cobbler. And because of his leather skills or woodworking skills, kind of gravitated into making artificial limbs. But again, there still wasn't a whole lot of organization around the industry, so it certainly needed more development. World War II. Following World War II, which again, there was a huge number of amputations and amputees coming back from the war. There was some dissatisfied customers, if you like, and dissatisfied with the lack of technology in their devices and really demanded improvement. And you can see from these pictures that, again, leather, metal, wood were still the favored materials. So the US government brokered a deal with military companies to improve prosthetic function rather than that of weapons. What a great idea. And this paved the way to the development and production of more modern prosthesis, and also led to the development of the Veterans Administration, which was quite a pivotal shift, I believe. And then we move on to the Vietnam War, from the late 60s into the 70s. And again, at the end of this conflict, there was another surge in the number of young veterans requiring prosthetic care. However, at this period in our history, certainly in the early 70s, we were starting to see the introduction of plastics to the prosthetic world. So this was a major shift. As I said earlier, wood and leather were the most popular materials, and plastics, polycarbonates, resins, carbon fibers, things like that were being introduced now as lightweight, easy to clean, and they're alternatives to wood and leather. So synthetic sockets could be custom fitted for each patient, and this tended to provide a more individualized, comfortable and hygienic fit. Now, when I started back in the mid-80s, I worked at Roehampton in London, which was a major center for veteran care. And I remember going into the leather shop, and there was just 20 benches with guys banging away on metal sockets. And they had come from the aircraft industry, and they had kind of repurposed their skills into making metal sockets and metal legs. But the noise was absolutely deafening. And in fact, I think a lot of these guys actually did suffer major hearing loss. So it's just interesting to see how the materials have developed. And nowadays, most of what we use are carbon fiber, laminates with resin, and thermoplastic materials. So lighter and stronger, and definitely much more easy to work with. And at the same time, there was a lot of thought given to the design of prosthetic devices. Up until the 60s and 70s, it was carving a socket out of a solid block of wood to measurements, and trial and error. There wasn't really molding of the individual's limb per se. So as we start to see the profession get more organized, we start to see improvements in casting and fitting and molding techniques, and the use of plaster of Paris to capture a mold was another game changer. You could wrap a roll of wet plaster around a patient's residual limb and achieve a very good close model of the patient's limb. And this would ultimately lead to a more comfortable fitting socket. I say prior to plastics and thermoplastics, patients would wear a woolen sock over the residual limb and stuff their limb into the socket, and that was it in terms of comfort. Nowadays, with foams and thermoplastics that we have available, we can fashion much more comfortable sockets. And again, getting an accurate shape, or accurate mold of the patient's limb is certainly an important part of doing that. And also at this time, we started to see a development of educational programs from prosthetists. So we've been elevated from cobblers to actual prosthetists at this point. And there was a lot of development in developing different courses at different educational institutes. What I think is one of the biggest game changers in the field was in the early 70s, Åsir Christensen, who was an Icelandic prosthetist. He had an idea to completely turn the design of prosthetics on its head. And he had spent a lot of time developing a silicone liner, a silicone interface that would roll onto the limb. And I remember seeing this early on in my career. It was still taking a while to take off. And I don't know that I was convinced that this was going to be the way forward, but fast forward 30 years and almost every patient wears some type of liner. So again, another amputee providing a solution. And I'm going to show this video here, which fast forward a little bit through it. It shows amputee donning a silicone liner. These are generally prefabricated, or they can be custom made limb. And The patient will invert the liner, roll it on the residual limb, and roll that up over the kneecap onto the thigh. This is obviously a below the knee amputee, and you see that there is a latch pin on the end of the liner. This is also a hybrid liner that uses a suction seal as well to improve the fit. So the patient applies the seal over the liner and takes the socket. The socket has a mechanism fabricated into the bottom that engages on the latch pin, and then the seal creates a vacuum seal around the socket. So she's a very, very positive suspension, and the limb is very well suspended. There's no movement between the limb and the socket, and that again leads to more comfort for the patient. So this was, again, in my mind, one of the huge developments in our field. Other developments in shape acquisition came with 3D scanning, and nowadays you can actually use your phone and an app to scan a patient's limb, and that can then be sent to a central fabrication unit, and they can 3D print your socket. So just look how far we've come from barrel staves all the way to 3D printing. 3D printing is still, I would say, in its infancy in our field. It's still fairly expensive to set up. So I think if you are using 3D printing, you tend to be using a central fabrication unit to do your work for you. But I believe as printers get less expensive and the process becomes faster, then we'll see more and more of this type of fabrication. And the socket, as my colleague Peter, who's going to speak later, will say, the socket really is the most important part. If this isn't comfortable and doesn't fit the limb well, it doesn't matter what we attach in the form of hardware, the socket has to be comfortable, and that is the most important part. So we'll talk a little bit about the development of some of the components of a prosthesis. Every prosthetic leg is going to have some kind of prosthetic foot. And early on in the 60s, the Satch foot was a major breakthrough. This was a solid rubber foot with a silicone foam bumper in the heel section, and this allowed the foot to operate kind of like an anatomical foot. This would compress at heel strike and then roll over as the patient walked. And then in the 70s, we had the development of the Seattle foot, where they actually put a dynamic material in the center of the foot that actually stored energy and released energy. And then in the 80s, we had the development of the flex foot. And the flex foot was developed by, yep, you guessed it, an amputee. A chap by the name of Van Phillips, and this is one of his original sketches. You can actually see his name there. And this J-shaped carbon design has been adopted by most of the foot manufacturers today in some shape or form. And it really acts like a giant spring. When the patient contacts the ground, the heel compresses, it stores energy, and as they move forward, the spring releases and provides assistance as the amputee walks. So although it doesn't necessarily look like a foot, by the time you put a cover over this, it can actually resemble a human foot fairly closely. But it's function that we're talking about. And as I say, these feet, with their ability to store energy and release it, were just a huge improvement over Satch feet and things like Seattle feet. A short video here, which shows an also designed foot, the flex shot. It's a fairly high-level foot that has a piston.
My name is Jim Bonney. I'm an below knee amputee.
Development here.
I've been an amputee since 2003 as a result of a mountaineering accident in 2001 when I was mountaineering in Alaska.
And Jim here is a young lad, and you can see in terms of walking and function, there isn't much that this young man can't do. Prosthetic feet are made in different categories. Obviously, for an older patient, less active, this may not be appropriate. But for a younger patient who takes part in sports and still doing athletic activities, then this is a very appropriate type of design. And you can see that the foot absorbs the impact very well. And what that does is really leads to the prosthesis being more comfortable. I'm just going to stop that there, and we'll move on to the next slide. So if we talk now about development of prosthetic knee components, we talked about feet a little bit. Now let's talk a little bit about knee. As you can see in this progression, we have gone from wooden legs with single pivots all the way up to metal limbs, to modular limbs, to modular limbs with carbon sockets and carbon fiber feet, which would be today. So it's been a progression from fairly heavy, cumbersome devices to fairly lightweight modular components, which makes the fabrication a little easier, and also offers much more in the way of restored function to the patient. After World War II, there was a major development in prosthetic knees, and this was by a gentleman called Hans Mauch, who was known for his work in early jet engine development in Germany, and after the war turned his attention to developing a piston, if you like, a hydraulic piston that could be used to control the bending of a prosthetic knee. And I think in my book, Hans Mauch was an absolute genius. This design is still used today in many different manufacturers' mechanical knees. It uses a very complex series of pistons and valves, and I saw a cross-section through one of these pistons when I was visiting one of the companies, and it's quite incredible that back in the 50s that this guy could come up with such a sophisticated design, and it's still, you know, in terms of mechanical knees, hasn't really been beat yet. So still something that's used today. However, as we moved into the 90s, time for another game changer. And this was the development and release of what we called microprocessor knees. If we go back one slide to the mechanical knee here, this is basically controlled by the patient. There's some resistance provided by the cylinder and the piston, but the patient has to be aware pretty much of where the leg is in space, how the knee is bending, what angle the knee's at. A lot more of conscious effort required. With microprocessor knees, imagine going from a stick shift car to an automatic transmission. That's kind of the quantum leap that we had here. The C-leg was the first knee developed by Otto Bock, another German company. And the control mechanism is similar to the Mauch knee in that it was a hydraulic piston. However, in the knee itself, there's a power source, a battery, and a microprocessor, and a range of sensors. So it can detect how much load is being put through the knee at any given time, and it can automatically adjust the resistance in the knee. So if the patient, for example, is going downstairs, it'll detect the amount of resistance needed and adjust the knee automatically that they can overstep downstairs. Really was an absolute game changer. And Peter, who I said is going to talk to us later, Peter was the first patient I ever fit with a microprocessor knee. And back in those days, you had to go on a course for 2 days, and it was very intensive. And now the programming is done basically on your phone or on your laptop over a Bluetooth link. It's very, very straightforward. And we have a couple of videos here that show just how efficient these knees are. Walking down a ramp for a patient with a mechanical knee was something that required a little bit of effort and control so that the knee didn't buckle and they didn't fall. And if we see this young lady going down a ramp here with a C-leg, that's pretty well controlled. And as I say, with a mechanical knee, it's just not as easy to do that. And then going downstairs, step over step. Oh, sorry, wrong video. Going downstairs, again, the knee senses how much weight is going through and automatically adjusts the resistance in the knee so that the patient can very smoothly step over step walk downstairs. Might not seem like a big deal, but it was a huge development at the time. And then the other big development with the microprocessor knees was in how we treated patients who had bilateral above knee amputations. Typically, that was a very hard segment of the patient population to provide functional prosthetic devices for. Trying to control mechanical knees as a bilateral patient was very difficult. However, with microprocessor knees, again, the knees are doing a lot of the work for you. They're calculating the resistance, they're calculating the load, and they're adjusting the resistances as we go. So this was again a huge step forward. Another type of microprocessor knee that's become very popular is the Rio Knee. This is an OSER product also from Iceland. This was developed through a partnership with MIT. I remember being on the clinical trials about 20 years ago. It uses completely different technology. There's no hydraulic piston here. It uses real magnetic fluid within the knee that when a current gets passed through, it changes the viscosity and therefore changes the resistance. Kind of like the same technology they use in advanced race car shock absorbers. The faster the car goes, the stiffer the shock absorber gets. Well, it's the same technology here. The more resistance, the more weight the patient puts on the knee, the more resistance the knee will actually provide. And here we have a video here of Luke, who I believe is French.
Marche avec un genou qui s'appelle le Rio
I'll actually
XC.
turn the video down, unless your French is good. Mine is not that great. But Luke was in a car accident about 15 years ago, so it's a traumatic amputation. Was ejected out of the car and suffered pretty much amputation on site. However, he has progressed very well, as you can see. He has a couple of different types of prosthetic legs. One of them is a microprocessor, one of them is a mechanical knee for running. And he's able to demonstrate really, really good control and good ability with both prosthetic devices. Microprocessor knees are not really designed for running. We tend to use mechanical knees because they're lighter. So they tend to be purpose-built for that. But for everyday prosthetic devices, for both knee amputees, microprocessor knees have become very, very common. Fast forward a little bit here. And the idea is to be able to restore the patient back to all the things they wanted to do prior to their amputation. And that's really what our job is, whether that's bike riding, playing sports, just going to work. Just anything that the patient wants to do. Luke actually works as a bike technician, so he's obviously got access to the very best technology when it comes to road bikes. But he's able to perform very, very well. And just another short video here. It's a young chap. I will turn the volume up here.
My name is Alton Drecker. I'm originally from Albania. I'm 28 years old. I'm an above knee amputee and also a prosthetist orthotist. I live here in Jacksonville, Florida for 10 years. I moved straight from Albania. I have lost my leg to a trauma. It was a hand grenade explosion when I was 11 years old. It was very devastating, especially during the teenage years, since those are the roughest years, and you think that everybody's looking at you. But whereas now, being on this field and also being an amputee for a long period of time, it doesn't bother me, and I try to inspire other ones so they can improve their life. Being a prosthetist has its benefits because you can try many different components and many different setups, which it helps you to decide whichever is the
So as this young man said, he's actually a prosthetist and an amputee, so it's quite a unique combination. But it certainly gives him the ability to try different types of knees, different types of feet, and find something that's going to work the best for him. Now, the technology he's using here is a microprocessor controlled knee with a pretty high activity prosthetic foot on the end. He's also using a silicone liner over his limb with a sealing ring here. and this will go into the socket and provide suction, so the limb is very well suspended. So this would be pretty much, I would say, state of the art for where we are today. Comfortable, self-suspended, highly functional prosthetic devices. Obviously, they do need maintenance, but the maintenance is fairly minimal, and we have a pretty neat program of keeping patients active when their limbs do need maintenance. If their knee breaks down, the manufacturer will send a loaner, so kind of like a rental car, so that the patient doesn't have to go without their prosthetic knee while it's being repaired. So I'm just going to move on to our next slide here. So what's new in terms of socket technology? What's the latest things? Again, another advancement in prosthetics is that of rapid fit, or direct socket as it's called. It is a fairly new process, and it allows the fabrication of a definitive socket in a 2 to 3 hour time frame. We fit last week, it was about an hour and a half from start to finish. What's unique about this process is that the socket is actually fabricated directly on the patient's limb. Usually we would take a mold, and then we would make a test socket from the mold, and we would try the test socket on, and then make a definitive socket from that. This process skips many of those steps and moves right to the fabrication part. It's quite an involved process, but it's also very straightforward, logical process, and it involves rolling a casting liner on the patient's limb, preparing the limb, and then placing the socket material, which in this case is a carbon basalt braid, directly over the patient's limb, and then another sleeve goes over that, and then through the end of the sleeve we inject resin. So this is a polyurethane acrylic resin, and this is being squirted right up through the end of the plate, and you can see the colleague here is working this up through the limb, and this has all been done live, real time on the patient. Once the saturated, excuse me, we place this air bladder and compress this over the limb, and this ensures that we have a nice snug socket fit. About 8 to 10 minutes after that, the material has cured, and we can remove the material, and we can start trimming this up and assembling it into a prosthesis. And that takes maybe another half hour or so to do that. We can then try this on the patient, do the final fabrication, assemble the leg with the prosthetic foot, and then have the patient try this on, and have them walk in the lab, make any adjustments that we need to the height, to the alignment, and as I said, within a 3 hour window, we've got the prosthesis ready to go. We can't use that and don't use that on every patient that we see, but it's another tool in our toolbox, and it certainly allows us in certain instances to produce a very quick result. Powered technology is probably one of the things that's going to really improve over the next
My name is Matthias.
few years.
I'm 31 years old.
This is Matthias, who's a below the knee amputee,
I love to be outside
and
in nature.
he's demonstrating a powered ankle. This was one of the first powered devices
I had this
that
accident.
came into our world. And this has a very powerful stepper motor built into the device and a fairly heavy duty battery. And what it's doing is actually providing forward propulsion. You remember, if we look back at some of the slides from the carbon fiber feet, those are what I would call passive. They store energy and they release the energy. This ankle here is actually providing energy, so it's a net increase in output for the patient. What does that mean? In theory, the patient can walk longer, longer distances using less energy. Energy expenditure is always going to be increased for an amputee, and the higher the level of amputation, the more energy they're going to use. So any device that gives back some of that energy and reduces some of the output from the patient is something that we would be interested in. The only issue we're having nowadays is insurance hasn't quite seen that these devices are medically necessary for every patient. The VA certainly will consider them, but regular insurance is still a little bit of a challenge. But I think as we move forward into the future, we're going to see more and more development of powered technology. Powered knees would be the next device. Again, this is a device that was pioneered by Osir in Iceland. So the powered knee provides powered extension and flexion. So it will bend the knee and it will straighten the knee on its own. It does not rely on much in the way of input for the patient. All the patient has to do is lift the prosthesis and the leg pretty much does the rest. So again, what does that mean for the patient? It means that they may be able to walk further with less energy expenditure, can be used for climbing stairs with less effort, and that's usually a very difficult thing for an above the amputee to do. The power knee here is the only one currently that is on the market. It's a little bulky, it does make some noise, and battery power is not great. So again, there's room for development. But you know, we have fit these, we have used them, and I think for the right patient, they're certainly worthy of consideration. And again, we're going to see way more in the development of powered technology as we go through.
There's really no limit.
So let's move on to future developments. Osseointegration. This is a scientific term for bone ingrowth into a metal implant. Any of you that have dental implants, that's what the technology is, and it's just been adapted to be used in prosthetics. And in this case, this is an above the knee amputee where the femur has been hollowed out and an implant has been placed into the femur, and the prosthesis attaches directly to the end of the implant. So what does that do? Well, it eliminates the socket, which is not good if you're a prosthetist and you get employed to make sockets, but this isn't a technique that will be used on everybody. This is for people who cannot wear a conventional socket for whatever reason, nerve pain, soft tissue issues, skin grafts, whatever. This is another tool in the toolbox that still allows somebody to be functional. The FDA took a long time to approve this for the United States, but it's now an approved technique. We have a couple of patients who have had this procedure done. It's certainly very odd just to see the implant sticking out from the end of the limb and the knee or foot attached straight to it. But patients certainly walk well. The only thing they have to do is keep this incision clean, because that is an open incision at all times, and that's still coming out, poking through the skin. So skin care and cleanliness is very important, but it can produce a very functional result. And then looking forward, I think we're going to see obviously more advancements in robotic prosthetics. We've already seen developments of neural interfaces where prosthetic devices connected directly to the brain. That's only going to continue to develop. We're going to see huge improvements, I think, in battery technology and fuel cell technology, which will make prostheses more efficient and lighter. And I think just a general acceptance of powered technology is going to be something that we see in the future. So let's have a quick look now at upper extremity prosthetics. We're at 2 o'clock, so we've got a little while to go here. And like we said earlier with lower extremity prosthetics, early components were pretty primitive. Lots of metal, leather, not hugely functional, not hugely comfortable. And really things didn't change much through World War I, World War II. I remember as a young student fitting something that looked very much like this in the mid-80s to a World War II veteran. So there was certainly a lot of work to be done in the development. But as materials started to improve in lower extremity prosthetics, that obviously trickled into upper extremity prosthetics. So the development of carbon fiber and thermoplastics certainly improved the production techniques and the fitting techniques and also the molding techniques. So in the same way that leg prosthetics improved, also arm prosthetics improved, kind of on a similar path. In terms of functional devices, the old favorite here, the hook, was developed, I think in the 40s or 50s, and it's been around a long time. Anyone who have young children in the house and know who Captain Hook is, you'll know that the hook has been a very prominent functional device for upper extremity amputees. This hook here we still use today. It still provides a very, very fine grip. It's very adaptable. It's obviously not very aesthetically pleasing, but in terms of function, patients get over that pretty quickly and realize that this is still today a very functional device. In terms of game changers, the development of electronic prosthesis was probably one of the biggest game changers in upper extremity prosthetics. In 1948, another German student created the first myoelectric prosthesis, and this was a device that actually amplified surface electromyography, EMG signals. Every time you flex a body part or you move your limb, you're creating a very small EMG signal. And if you can harness that signal, you can use it in a control strategy to operate a device. And the use of myoelectrics in prosthetics really started to take off in the 70s and the 80s. And then in the 90s, we had the development of a multi-grip myoelectric hand. The ILM hand was invented by David Gow in my home country of Scotland, and was manufactured by a company called Touch Bionics, which is now part of OSER. And the big difference with this hand was that each of the fingers had their own power source. So you had four fingers and powered thumb. So now all of a sudden you had a multitude of grasp patterns available to the amputee that was not available before. So this again was a huge game changer. And we have a short video here that just shows some of these devices in action. And the most up-to-date version is the Quantum, which actually uses gesture control to select pre-programmed grip. Cool. The patient just has to move the hand in one of four directions. Grasp pattern. Bilateral amputees can also benefit from this technology. A very fine pinch grasp allows you to do the difficult tasks. Rotating thumb, another huge advance, which gives a variety of grasp patterns. And all of these hands have a user portal that they can access through an app on their iPhone or their Android. So they can actually make some changes to the programming of the hand using the phone, which again is a huge step forward in terms of acceptance. And really, this is, I think, just the start of things to come. We're only going to see more and more improvements in the development of electrical hands. I'll stop that there and go on to the next slide. So taking this a step further, the Look arm was invented by a company called Drecker, known for the invention of the Segway, which was the powered two-wheel scooter. Some of you may even have tried one. Dean Kamen, D-E-K-A, Dean Kamen founded Drecker, an absolutely brilliant man. And he was tasked with this through the DARPA project, the Defense Advanced Research Project Association, to come up with an arm that had multiple degrees of movement. And in his case, this arm has 27 degrees of movement. Powered shoulder, humeral rotation, powered elbow, powered wrist, powered thumb, powered fingers, multiple grasps. It's unlike anything that we had seen up until this point. And we have a short video here showing a gentleman by the name of Fred Downs, who actually used to be chief of the VA prosthetic service for many years. Absolutely terrific.
I was a second lieutenant in the Army in Vietnam in 1967. And in 1968, leading a combat patrol, I was with the 4th Division. I stepped on a bouncing Betty early in the morning at 7:45, and it flew up out of the ground and exploded waist high. I was flying through the air and I threw my arms like this, and there was nothing but a white jagged bone here. And I could see both bones of my wrist to my elbow. So from here forward, it looked pretty good, but there was a big gap. It was all that had been vaporized in the explosion. So he laid that across my stomach, and this hand, which I could no longer control, he laid it across my stomach, and I didn't know that from the waist down, I'd also lost a lot of, I've been severely wounded. The VA Research and Development told me about this arm and that DARPA was funding it, DECA had made it, and they wanted the VA to be interested in it. And since I was the National Director of Prosthetics, they came to me and they convinced me that I should be one of the clinical trial subjects.
It became very evident very quickly that this was going to be a huge benefit for Fred. And because of the ease in learning how to use it, he became very proficient at it very quickly. And I think because of that, it changed his whole mindset about advanced technology and what it could do for people that were missing their hands.
I've been very skeptical of new inventions and how much they're going to make your life better. But I came up here to DARPA, working with the VA, and they fit me with my first Luke arm. And for the first time in 47 years, after a few hours of learning how to use it, I was able to drink using my left arm, which was just phenomena for me. Brought tears to my eyes. The crucial part of wearing an upper extremity prosthetic, actually any prosthetic, is the fitting process. The whole process of making sure the socket fits, the harnessing, which is very, very crucial to a good fit, how to put that harness on me to carry all of that weight, and the interrelationship, which is got to be, the chemistry between your prosthetist and yourself has got to be just right, so that you feel like you're being treated as a human being and not just a product. And immediately, that's the Albuquerque and his crew. They made you feel welcome, concerned about me as a patient. And since this was so crucial, this fitting with this type of arm, which was unique and new, why that relationship between Next Step and myself was crucial to my success in wearing this.
Being somebody that's a prosthetist, that provides limbs for somebody that needs them, there's a real personal relationship that a lot of time comes out of that. You know, we are replacing parts of people's bodies, and to do that without knowing the person and developing a sense of trust and respect, I don't know how it gets done without that.
They devised a harness that distributed the weight of the arm across and around the back of my body, so it was comfortable. And it reminded me of a backpack. In the military, we'd carry tons of weight, pounds, 70, 80 pounds of weight in our back, in our rucksacks. And it was the harnessing system that enabled us to do it, because it spread the weight over our torso. So the same concept in my mind is what they've done with this socket and harnessing, is to enable me to, look, I can move all around like this, up and down, and just doing that with a little stump, that's all I got left.
When you look at what we've been able to do for Fred, and when he talks about feeling normal and being dignified and being able to dress himself and be able to do things independently, I don't know if we can do that for everybody in the world, but I do know the people that we should be doing it for is our nation's military, who have gone out and signed on the bottom line, and through no fault of their own are now missing parts of their body. We have the technology to replace that. What's going to be very, very important is we find the same experts to fit this technology that we did in terms of building the technology.
Because the human body is fluid, to take your stump or whatever's left of your leg or your arm and to mold it properly to get the right socket fitting, that's a real artistic thing that has to be done. In the prosthetic world, there are some prosthetists who are artists, and that's going to be the type of individual that needs to be working with this type of a product. You're not going to be able to mass-produce prosthetic arms with sockets with this type of device, because of the intricacy of the control system, the harnessing, everything has to be just right. And any arm amputee will tell you on the harnessing and the socket, just a little bit of difference will make all the difference in the world. So the value of what data comes out of the Walter Reed study will help future generation of prosthetists and others know what they need to do to improve that prescription process. There's what I think of this arm. Thumbs up.
So, yeah, that's, I think, just a nice summary of what we do. Looking forward, future developments, I think what you're going to see is the combination of osseo integration with upper extremity arms. So again, no need for a socket. There'll be an implant in the humerus, and the arm will connect directly to that, and there'll be a Bluetooth cuff that goes around, or two cuffs that go around the arm to harness EMG signals, and those will control the position and function of the hand. So pretty high-tech stuff that's only going to get better as we go forward. What does the future hold? I'm not sure, but I know it's going to be fun. As a kid, 5-year-old, I guess, my favorite program on a Saturday night was the $6 Million Man. I don't know what it was about this show, but boy, this sure took my fancy. The fact that they could rebuild this man and put him back together with all this fancy technology. And you remember, this is in the 70s, so you know this was like science fiction to a 5-year-old. I think we're going to see continued development, improvements in function, improvements in comfort, hopefully improvements in insurance reimbursement that keep up with this technology that allow us to fit this to patients. But it's certainly going to be very exciting, I think. So at this point, I would like to introduce my very good friend, Peter Cannell, Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired, who I have known, the pleasure of knowing for many years. I'm going to stop the share here and go back to our gallery view. And Peter, if you'd like to join us here. And
hello.
Hi.
Can everybody see me, hear me?
And then Linda, did we have any questions at this point that we could answer? Or
Well, would Peter just like to introduce himself and say a few words about who he is and his background and why he's here?
Okay. My name's Peter Cannell. I'm a disabled veteran. I joined the military in 1966, the Army. In 1967, when I turned 18, I got orders to go to Vietnam. I went to Vietnam for the whole year of 1968. I successfully made it through the whole year without getting hurt. I was in the second of the first cab, a unit that was out doing all kinds of things. There were some shaky moments, but I made it through the whole year. I came back. I was training troops in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I had a terrible accident, a Jeep rollover. The brakes locked on me and it rolled over. So my leg was damaged beyond repair. So they had to amputate. And so after that, they sent me home to the VA instead of Walter Reed, because Walter Reed at that time was really backed up. There were just so many people there. So it was not until 1970 when I first got my prosthetic leg. It weighed 14 pounds. It was a good old-fashioned prosthetic leg. It was heavy. It did have the Mauk unit, which was really a good knee unit. And that's the way it was for a long time. And then that's when I heard about the new technology, the microprocessor knees. And that's when I hooked up with Arthur. I think that was around 2000 or earlier, I forget. But
yeah, it was 1999, Peter.
Wow. And one of the things is that I didn't know what to expect. And because I had been on this old prosthetic limb, and the type and the type of knee, the switch to the new type knee and a new type fit actually was really hard. I had to retrain myself how to walk with it, how to use it. And after a couple of months, it was the best thing I've ever had since losing the leg. It worked really well. Stumble recovery was excellent on it. Falling down was almost not at all. And it was just so reliable going downstairs. You could control the speed, you can lessen the impact. And that's one of the things that changed my life as an amputee. And of course, it actually got better from there. But that's about all I can say for an introduction. That's it.
Well, then we will open this out.
Okay.
We will open this up, folks. It's now time for Q&A. We invite you to ask questions to either or both Arthur and Peter. Peter, you probably have long pants on, right?
I have shorts on.
You have shorts on? Tell me, you're not modest,
like
right, about showing. Is there any way you can sit back and stick your leg up and show us what your prosthesis looks like?
Oh, yeah, sure, no problem.
I'd really enjoy that. I think the audience would enjoy. There you go.
There we go.
Okay. Because I remember from one of the videos, it's very important, and I'm sure you've learned that over time. It's very important to say, this is me, this is who I am, this is my leg. And you probably have gotten over that years ago, right?
Well, it used to be that they would take the prosthetic limb and laminate it with a color that was close to your race or whatever, and it never fooled anybody. So what happened was there were a couple of the amputees that just started saying, hey, I don't need a cover. We're just going to walk around. It'll look like a real mechanical knee, because it is. And that's what we did. And then as the prosthetics got better, so didn't the covers for the prosthetics. Like I have a fancy design on my socket. And the design on the X3 that I have is a nice tapered look to it. And for something that's artificial, it actually looks pretty cool.
Well, Gresh Lattimore wants to follow up on that very same question.
Okay.
Beyond the mechanics of a prosthetic device, what are the psychological and the spiritual aspects of having an artificial limb, and what helped you cope? And then he wants to say thank you for serving and sharing.
Oh, you're welcome. So, again, I was just 19. I was a very physical person. At that time, I was the physical training instructor for my unit at Fort Knox, Kentucky, take them out for the runs, do the what they used to call calisthenics. And after losing the leg, I'm laying there thinking, what am I going to do now? I had a limited education at that time. And I've had some nurses and doctors, not all, would say, well, you have to start thinking differently. You can't be as physical as you were. And part of me believed that, but another part of me said, no, there's another side to this. So after getting home, with the support of my friends and family, I was able to get better at almost everything. Got gait training, made me feel better inside. But the psychological part of it, which overlaps with the spiritual part, is that you have to look in the mirror, you have to take your leg off, you have to look at your residual limb or stump, and that's when it hits you that you are different. You are different from most everybody. So you have to come to terms with that. And that's a long process. It just doesn't, you don't snap a finger and get through that. And you question a lot of things in life. And eventually, after you get over the anger, the frustration, things start to look better. But I taught myself how to re-ride a bike. I jumped in the swimming pool. I got lessons. I did as much as I could, jump in the canoe. But the thing that changed my life was I learned how to ski on one leg. Now, it doesn't have to be skiing today, but it can be anything. But when I saw an advertisement for an organization up at Mount Sunapee, you can learn how to ski if you have a disability, particularly one leg. And when I went up there, that was the very first thing that I did that convinced me I can do anything. And then I went on to become a ski instructor. I ran the organization, and I taught a lot of people how to ski. And that really made a huge difference. And from that sport grew all the sports you see for disabled people now. The organization used to be Disabled Sports USA. It has a different name now. But the thing was that it opened the door to you that, yeah, you're disabled, but there are things you can do, and sometimes better than most other people. And that's what changed my life for the better and put me on the road to, wow, I can do this.
Peter, that was a beautiful answer. Thank you. I'm just so glad that was your path. I'm just so glad that's how it turned out for you. Jim Ramsey would like to know, again, a question of Peter. What has been the role of the VA in your journey with prostheses?
Okay, so when I got out, of course, there was a lot of people coming back from Vietnam that were getting hurt. And so the VA was, it sort of had, it was hard to get things right away, but they did get you in there. It was a process that everybody had to go through. They evaluated you physically and a few other things, and they recommended what you would need to become more active or to walk, whatever was in their thinking. And your role in that was, they're the experts, listen to them and see what's going to happen. And when they made the leg, which in those days, it took a couple of months for a leg to be made. And if the prosthetist was busy, real busy, even longer. And so the VA will provide the guidance and usually at that time make the determination of what you would get and how you would get it. So that worked out well because there were that many different type limbs. You only had one real good knee and one real good foot. And the rest of it was who was going to make the leg for you. That was more important than usually the parts. As I often say, all this material is created equally, but the people who put it together for you are not. So sometimes you can go one place and they don't do a good job. That means you either have to figure it out with them or find somebody else who can do a better job.
Arthur, I know that your firm has a very cooperative and positive relationship with the VA. Would you talk a little about that?
Yeah, we've been a provider to the VA since the company was founded. And what does that mean? It means that we will accept payment for services provided to veterans, basically. But it's more than that. I mean, it's really a partnership. In Boston, it's a little unique in that they have their own prosthetic department at West Roxbury. So they have their own prosthetists and they see veterans. So we don't see that many veterans from this area because most of them will get directed to the in-house services. But a veteran can go anywhere they want. They can go to any contracted provider. They can also go to a provider without a contract if the provider accepts the fee schedule from the VA. So veterans have lots of choice. They just need to be reminded sometimes that they have choice, and if things aren't working out, they can exercise that right to choose where they go for their care.
Another question for you, Arthur. Bob Lewis would like to know, what education training route do you recommend for someone who's interested in becoming a prosthetist?
Good question. So nowadays it's all master's level education. So most of the students will do an undergrad in something life science orientated, kinesiology, sports medicine, things like that. And then they'll do their master's degree. So it's, I'm kind of like physical therapy it's gone all the way from bachelor's to master's to doctorate. I imagine we are on a similar trajectory here. Another question here. Have the conflicts in Afghanistan with so many losing limbs made it easier for them to access current technology? Yes, I think definitely the Afghanistan and Iraq conflicts were major game changers in terms of access to new technology. It was probably the first time, other maybe than Desert Storm, that major conflicts were in the news all day, every day. And what happened to veterans that were injured was also followed through the media. So I think it can be a double-edged sword, but I think in most cases it was a good thing because it highlighted the need for improved care and improved devices, and it also released funding. The arm that you saw Fred Downs demonstrate, the Luke arm, that was all funded through DARPA, which is funded through the Department of Defense. That would never have happened without the exposure.
Okay, so that was Tony's question.
Yep.
Gresh has another question for you. As a Scot, how have you found the opportunities to excel in your field as you have? Would this have been possible in Scotland?
There's a book you should all go and read. It's called How the Scots Invented the Modern World. And you think about it, telephone, Scots, TV, Scots, pneumatic tire, Scots. You know, when you run through history, that the Scots have a little bit of a reputation of being innovators. So I think maybe that's part of it. But seriously though, I think I came here 25 years ago just for something different, really. I was kind of frustrated in the healthcare system in the UK as it was, and I just saw more opportunities to practice and more access to more modern technology probably over here, and that was the attraction. So that was really what brought me over here.
Okay, folks. I'm scanning for more questions. I think we're up to date on the questions. Last call for questions or comments for Arthur or Peter. Peter, do you have any final things you want to say, having listened to some of the questions and the comments that were raised?
Well, the last thing I have to say, I've been involved over the last several years in research. And what Arthur said about there's going to be big changes, oh yeah, there is. The neuroscience is going to be really big. I did one test where the computer was hooked up and it monitored my movements. And then several weeks later, they said, Peter, don't even think, just stand there and move. And when I moved, the computer took over the actual walking. It was the best gait, the best movement I've ever felt in the artificial leg. Of course, it had an electronic knee, but it was like, wow, it was so smooth. And that's what's coming.
Well, Arthur, you were absolutely right that Peter was one heck of a sidekick for you to bring today.
He trained me well.
Yeah, I would say so. How many of these presentations have you done together?
Oh, quite a few.
Yes, especially at school.
Yeah, Peter would come and demonstrate quite often for the students at Northeastern. So yeah, he's just the best.
Have you taught Arthur to ski? Peter?
Oh, no, he's actually a great skier.
Oh, he already knew how.
Oh, yeah.
Just checking.
They don't have much snow in Scotland, but
No, they don't.
Well, I think that we've got several kudos here in the chat. Thanking you very much. So I think that will about do it. We can't thank you enough, Arthur. This was a subject that we had not covered before. And it was one that needed to be covered because there were just so many advancements right around the corner. It
I'm
was
very,
nice we
very
all knew about it.
that we finally could get this together after all the COVID rescheduling and all the rest of it. So thanks again for.
Yes, folks, we started talking together 2 years ago. And with snowstorms and COVID and everything, it took this long to get together, but we hung in there. Thank you very much for being with us, Arthur and Peter. It was terrific.
you're
So
welcome.
folks, that will conclude our presentation for this afternoon. Have a wonderful post-COVID summer. Stay well. Have a wonderful time. See you in September. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for your support.